Hey, thanks everybody for joining today. My name is Keith Purnell. Today we're going to do our live webinar for rice resistance, best management practices, and stewardship. Now, this is a collaborative effort between BASF, Horizon Ag, and the University of Arkansas. I just want to show you the agenda. From BASF, we're going to talk about Clearfield and Provisia stewardship and management. First off is going to be Andrea Smith, and then I'll talk myself on Provisia, and then we'll hand this off to Dr. Bob Scott at the University of Arkansas to talk about Arkansas wheat management and rice. And then last will be Horizon Ag, Dr. Tim Walker, going over the seed selections and the seed choices we have at Horizon Ag. And then the last slide, please stay with us to the end, there will be the CCA credits, and we'll keep that up so you can make sure that you get your CCA credits, as well as that'll be where we answer all our questions and answers. And so if you have any questions during this presentation, please put them in the chat and we will answer those at the very end. So let's go ahead and get started. First off, we will have Ms. Andrea Smith talking about Clearfield best management practices and stewardship.
Yes, thank you, Keith. Again, my name is Andrea Smith. I am the tech service rep for Arkansas in the Missouri boot field. Today, I want to discuss a little bit of Clearfield best management practices. We've had Clearfield around for several years. It's widely used. We know there is quite a bit of documented resistance to some of the Clearfield technology, but there are still a few fields in Arkansas where it works really well. So if this technology is still working in your area, I commend you for that, and keep practicing the stewardship methods so that we can keep it working. For the Clearfield system, as always, we want to start clean and stay clean. When it comes to these red rice populations that have been around for years, they have compounded, and it's important that we are starting the year off clean, that we are making sure that we're using other modes of action. Sharpen is an excellent job. Sharpen, we can use 2 to 4 ounces. A lot of folks in Arkansas are using the 3 to 4 ounce rate. That sharpen provides not only knockdown, but when we're using that 3 to 4 ounce rate, we're getting extended residual control. The next thing we want to talk about is importance. Sorry, if you go back a slide. There we go. The one thing I want to touch on before I move on is just use of residuals here at the bottom, making sure that we have that effective residuals in the tank so that we can get control in between our knockdown applications. Prowl is an excellent resistance management tool. It does a good job in providing residual control of grasses like barnyard grass, panicum, and sprangletop. And then one other thing on the slide, we talk about spray volume. This is really critical in stewardship that we have good coverage. We always want more carrier volume if we can get it, because we need to get coverage. We need to drive that herbicide into the plant. Okay, Heather, next slide. The next point I want to discuss is just making sure that we're using rotation. A lot of times we're seeing Clearfield rice behind Clearfield rice for consecutive years. When we have escapes and we can't control the red rice and we're continuously using the Clearfield system, this is where we see resistance develop quickly. It's important that we rotate crops. We can rotate into something like soybeans. When we are in that rotational soybean years, there's other modes of action that do an excellent job of controlling that red rice. If you are in a soybean year, things like Zidua, Outlook, all those other group 15s do an excellent job. Next slide, Heather. Just a few watch outs for the Clearfield system. We do not want to grow crawfish following growing Clearfield rice. We want to make sure that we are not allowing any Clearfield rice to go to seed in a non-rice year. We want to, this includes any fallow or crawfish production fields. We want to make sure that we're getting all those escapes cleaned up. Next slide, Heather. And the last slide I have on the Clearfield end of things is just an overview of our portfolio for the Clearfield system. Again, we have Sharpen to start off the season, followed by our post-emergent tools like ClearPath, NewClass, or Basset and Beyond Extra. When it comes to rotating different chemistries, and Keith will discuss this here in a second, when we talk about rotating between Clearfield, Provisia, conventional, and our soybeans, there are rotational restrictions with NewPath. One thing I will say, the Beyond Extra is more favorable than NewPath because it doesn't stay in the soil as long. So if you're rotating between the Clearfield and Provisia system, the Beyond Extra works excellent and does not have as long as a plant back restriction. Again, this is for the Clearfield system. There is documented resistance for this system, but there are still several fields where it works very well. So we want to make sure that we are being stewards of the technology and so we can keep it working for years to come. Next slide, Heather. Thank you, and I'll pass it back to Mr. Keith.
Thank you, Andrea. So I'm going to go through the Provisia best management and stewardship, very similar to what Ms. Andrea did. So next slide. Just like we talked about previously with Clearfield, we know about the seed bank. We know it's enormous. But one thing we want to make sure we stress is we want to make sure we're only using Provisia herbicide on Provisia rice. When we think about starting clean in the Provisia system, unlike the Clearfield system, we want to avoid using ACCase herbicide or perminicide herbicides, things like clethodim. There are plenty of other tools to use besides that. Again, same thing, glyphosate and Sharpen, Command and Sharpen are great to help start clean, which is the key, regardless of whether it's rice or any other crop. Again, the other thing is the pre-emergent grass and broadleaf. Obviously, we want to be able to put things in a tank as best we can to have a broad spectrum control. It saves the grower money each pass across the field, but we want to do it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that with things that when we put in a tank don't reduce the efficacy. So again, we want to be broad spectrum when we can. Use glyphosate as your friend and make sure that we can start as clean as we can. Next slide. I want to take a step back a little bit on some of the things we'll be talking about here, and I just want to give a little background. So one of the things we've always talked about, again, is rotation. But I want to talk a little bit more about back in 2023, there was an abnormal cold period that occurred, and we saw some more crop response when it comes to rice. So one of the things we know with rice is we want to make sure that rice is actively growing. And we have come up with recommendations, as well as this is something that we've developed with the consultants in the Mid-South, that we want to make sure that Provisia rice, as well as any rice, is actively growing. And that's usually around when you're seeing that 60-degree temperature. Again, we try to do the best we can with forecast, but as you know, Mother Nature is in control of a lot of things. And so we do the best we can to forecast to make sure that we have good growing conditions before and after those applications. That's one thing I went through, we want to stress, because obviously we're getting ready to start doing some planting if we haven't already in certain areas. And we just want to be mindful of that forecast in case we see that coming. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So next slide. So just like Andrea said, we know, and we'll harp on this, on the GPA and the correct adjuvant. With Provisia, we only recommend the crop oil concentrate. That is what we recommend with Provisia. When we talk about actively growing red rice, weedy rice, in general, the wheat, as we know, you have to have the rice actively taking stuff up. It has to actively growing. And that's the same thing when it comes to the rice. And it goes back to, if rice is under stress because of the cold temperature, then the weeds will be too. So putting an application out when you don't have actively growing rice or weeds because of the temperature or what have you is not recommended. Next slide, I'll talk about the multiple applications here in just a second. So what that has also allowed us to do, and one of the flexibilities and one of the advantages of the Provisia label is we have the ability to use 2 or 3 shots. We have not seen any injury when we were using 10-ounce rates of Provisia, even under those conditions. So that is an advantage. Not only do you get the weed control, obviously it's less money across the field, but it gives you the flexibility to, if you're ratooning the crop, you have a shot in that ratoon crop. The other times is there's a lot of acres that when you're getting that flood across the field might take 7 to 10 days. So you're going to have another flush of weeds. Here's another chance for you to make another application before flood. So it provides you that additional benefit of having the flexibility of multiple applications and getting that proven weed control. Next slide. Like I originally talked about, when we talk about, we want to broaden the spectrum of our rice portfolio whenever we're putting it across the field. It saves the grower money. But if you're not putting the things in there that you see necessarily on this list, and we'll talk about things not to put in there, these are the things we recommend putting into the tank to broaden the spectrum, because we know they don't antagonize or reduce the level of control. Because when we reduce the level of control and antagonize Provisia or whatever herbicide in there, that's a waste of money and it's a recipe for resistance, because now you're allowing that weed to be able to develop and deal with that tolerance, because it's not they're just antagonizing, and it's just a waste of money, and again, it's not very good for our resistant management. So these are some things we recommend for weedy rice. Next one. And these will be, as you see, they're very similar to the same thing that we recommend for barnyard grass. So next slide. And so these are things that we do not recommend in a tank mix. Propanil, Regiment, Triclopyr, grass type herbicides, and 2,4-D. If you need to use these, it is recommended to wait 7 days after the Provisia application. The research has shown that if you wait 7 days, you're not going to have that negative effect. But these are definitely not things that I would put in the tank with Provisia, because you will get a definite antagonism with those. So again, these are we do not recommend these. Please wait 7 days after the Provisia application if you do need to make an application of any of these herbicides. Next slide. So again, just like Andrea showed, there's a schematic of the rice growing plants and in the growth stages. And as you can see, starting clean and also having your residual here with the prow. Facet and Basset Ground are great tank mix partners with Provisia. And again, even if you look at that post-harvest, again, that third application, if you need it, as long as we stay within that 31 ounces in that year, again, you have that flexibility. Next slide, please. Again, just some of the key takeaways from Provisia. Again, make sure that rice is actively growing. Utilize that 60-degree temperature as your standard, if you will. But again, do the best you can on forecasting. Next slide. Again, proper GPA, correct adjuvant, crop oil concentrate, apply to small weeds, as we know that's the best chance of having the best success. Utilizing the best tank mixture in the first application is great, like a prow, getting those multiple applications. Using multiple applications and multiple modes of action are one way and the best way to help reduce the chances of resistant management. Again, one of the things we want to make sure, yes, we want to broaden the spectrum, but we also want to make sure that we're putting things in the tank that do not antagonize those that weed control. Next slide, please. So in addition to chemical management, let's not forget about the other things we have. That water and that water management is something that's very key. We recommend trying to get that flood on there as soon as possible. And again, one of the advantages about having the Provisia is if you can't get it on, there's also that additional shot. if you have an extended period of time. The other thing, just like we see in row crops for pigweed and palmer and water hemp, if you see a weed out there, please go out there and rogue and hand pull it. I know it could be a pain, but the more we can do now to not let things go to seed and multiply, it's only advantageous for us. One of the things we definitely know, and one of the things that you as the grower are going to know way better than us, is how bad are your fields infested with weedy rice, and harvest those last. Then when you get finished, please clean the equipment as best you can. That's only going to help reduce the spread. There's usually a lot of good time after the season is over to make sure that's done, and that is hopefully an easy management that we can do to kind of help ourselves. And lastly, roll and flush the rice to try to promote that growth in the fall. And then when it does come up, hit it with a shot of glyphosate or something else to try to kill it. And then hopefully by that time we have a killing frost, and then that way, hopefully that'll kill off any of the remaining plants. Next slide, please. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Bob Scott with the University of Arkansas.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I want to say that I appreciate the opportunity to join this webinar. I appreciate BSF and including the university, not only here today, but in their research program. They've always had a really good collaborative relationship, and certainly Clearfield Rice and Provisia are no exception. I just want to share a little bit of information with you regarding really the status of kind of resistance in Arkansas, and a little bit more on the rate structure change that Keith just mentioned for Provisia. So if I could have the next slide. This is a study that Andrea and Smith and I had at our new research station up at Harrisburg. The bars on the left were planted to max-ace rice, and high-card herbicide was used. The bar on the right were to a Provisia variety with Provisia, and you can see the rate structures down at the bottom. I'm not sure we followed all the best management practices in this trial, to be real honest. We were trying to get a little bit bigger grass to kind of put this technology to the test, if you will. For those of you that don't know, high card herbicide, both products are quizalofop, but the high card herbicide does contain a safener. And safeners can be kind of tricky because you safen it to prevent injury on the rice, but if you're not careful for certain weeds, and in this case, you can kind of see the lower control of barnyard grass and a little bit also on the weedy rice with high card. So it's kind of a walking a fine line there. So with a little bit bigger weeds, we did see an advantage in this trial to the Provisia system. This was my first opportunity to look at the 3-shot program with Provisia. I've been away from weed science for a little while, and so coming back, this was a good trial for me. And I like the 10 followed by 10 followed by 11. The 11 followed by 10 followed by 10 was pretty much equal to 15 and a half twice. And just in general, again, I thought it did a little bit better job overall than the high card. We saw this at another location as well, down at Stuttgart. At that trial was planted a little bit earlier, and we did in fact see some injury on the high card, as well as a little less injury on the Provisia varieties under cool wet, less than ideal conditions for those. But in this trial, there was no injury, so there's no ratings for that listed up there. I think we have an aerial shot of this trial for the next slide, Heather. So I got to credit Andrea for this photo. I haven't learned to fly my drone yet, but she went in later after some of those ratings were taken, and you can see the max ace plots. There's 15 and a half twice, the 11, 10 and 10, and the 10, 10 and 11, and then the same structure on the far right with the Provisia timing. So it got pretty visual later on as that weedy rice and barnyard grass got bigger in those plots. So next slide. So this brings me to my second thing I wanted to discuss, and that is our weed seed sampling program. We have had some type of resistance screening going on since the early 2000s. These plants are typically collected by county agents and others throughout the year, and they're sent up to Dr. Jason Norsworthy's greenhouse at Fayetteville, where we do whole plant assays. What that means is we have to get the seed that is sent in from as many as 200 fields a year around the state. We grow that out in the greenhouse, and we just perform a kind of a blanket screening of multiple families of chemistry. And then we try to get those reports back to consultants, county agents, whoever sent them in time for the following year so that decisions can be made on those fields based on the resistance, the documented resistance that they now have, and hopefully save money ultimately by not choosing the wrong program to begin with. The one important thing to point out about these samples is that they're not random. Obviously, these samples are taken in fields where there's been a problem, so it's a heavily weighted sampling program, and you tend to have a lot more positives than you would in just a random sampling program. So the program has been focused on barnyard grass and weedy rice, really in rice, and then a lot lately on palmer amaranth and other crops. Next slide, please. This is just an example. For those of you that are in Arkansas or Arkansas adjacent, you can visit your county office and pick up one of these sheets. It asks for a lot of information there. The main thing is to get a big enough sample, a big grocery bag full of whatever population it is you want to test. You can take a composite sample for a given field, or you can test a field in a couple of different areas. We want mature seed. We want it labeled. GPS and county are preferable. And again, you can take them to your county agent. Some people do drop them off in person at the Weeds Lab in Fayetteville. But this has been a very valuable tool for us, and I should probably point out that it's funded by the Arkansas Rice Checkoff dollars, and without that support, we wouldn't be able to offer this service. So it's a good service. It also helps us generate a lot of data about what's going on out there in the field. So next slide. So if you're familiar with rice production in Arkansas, that's barnyard grass samples on the left and weedy rice samples taken on the right. And if you know kind of where the rice is grown and you look at that, the little yellow dots, it sort of maps out the river valley all the way up through Jonesboro and down towards Stuttgart and Pine Bluff, up and down kind of the heavy rice production areas. So we get a good, this is from 2024, so we get a good conglomerate of samples there. The first thing that I would point out in terms of weedy rice, and one of the things that has me concerned is for the last couple of years, we had gotten 21 and 22 samples of weedy rice, but in 2024, we got 97 samples of weedy rice. So just the fact that samples had a 5-fold increase in 2024 has got me concerned about the further development of resistance in our important technologies that we have for rice. Next slide. So unfortunately, this past year, this is an example of the weedy rice successions that were tested in Arkansas in 2024. And again, I have to put a caution on looking at this data. 100% of the weedy rice successions that were sent in were in fact resistant to the Clearfield technology. But again, these are coming out of fields where there were failures. And as Andrea mentioned earlier, there's still a lot of fields where Clearfield brings value. And this is just weedy rice. This doesn't mean that all the weeds in that field were resistant. But of course, weedy rice being one of the most important ones. 10% of the samples that came in, unfortunately, were also found to be resistant to quizalofop. That's either Provisia or high card. They probably came out of both of those fields. All of the quizalofop resistant samples were also cross-resistant to new path. So that's a little bit disturbing. And again, just should get everybody's attention because of the increase in the number of samples that came in and the fact that we had this many positives. I would also like to point out, if you remember, on that form, we asked for a little bit of field history. And it's worthy to point out that almost all of these multiple resistant samples, as well as a good number of the Clearfield only resistant samples, all came from fields that were in continuous rise or it was not stated on the form. Next slide. So what can we do about it? You know, unfortunately, right now, the Clearfield technology and the Provisia technology are the only herbicide tolerant varieties that we have for use in controlling weedy rice. So if we miss weedy rice, there's really not a lot from a herbicide standpoint that we can do. I do want to point out there is one product, benzobicycline, trade name Rogue, that can be used in zero grade fields and fields where irrigation water can be maintained and held. You can't use Rogue in row rice. You can't use Rogue if you have to run a lot of water through the field. It needs a very stable water. You can learn more about that from the MP44 or by talking to Gowan Company. But it is one of the few products, and I don't know if our next slide puts words up there or does it go away here? Yeah. So one of the things about benzobicycline is it does suppress some red rice biotypes. So one of our recommendations for resistance management, really in all Provisia fields, especially if you have any other weeds out there that Rogue is good on, like in this case, this escaped nutsedge, it can be a real benefit to eliminate some of those escaped red rice populations. It does come, however, at a pretty significant cost for the technology. Next slide, please. So beyond that, you know, I just thought I would throw this slide up here, and some of you may be familiar with that poster on the right if you've been around as long as I have, and actually that's older than me. But you know, prior to the introduction of Clearfield, prior to Provisia coming along after that, we didn't have a lot of options, not good ones anyways. Water seeding, which these technologies have almost eliminated, especially in Louisiana and places where it used to be very prevalent. Crop rotation is a good option. You can do some things with planting and date, seeding rate, and even variety selection. Guys used to fallow fields to eliminate a flush, and then there's roguing in addition. So I kind of put this up there just to remind everybody that it's important that we protect these technologies. One final thought that I'll say to that is, although way on down the pipeline, there are some new herbicide technologies being evaluated. They're a long ways off. So for the time being, we need to continue to protect Provisia and that herbicide tolerant group to get us to the next technology. Next slide. For those of you that don't have it, there's my phone number, my email. I'd be glad to answer any questions. I'll obviously stay on here, but later on, if you have anything, that's my information.
Next up, Mr. Tim Walker.
All right, thank you, Keith. And I just want to say again, thank you, BASF, for putting this on. Speaking of Provisia, I'm actually in Puerto Rico right now. We just completed harvesting what will be the PBL05 variety launched in 2026. So we are excited about our pipeline. We have 05 and 06 that will be on a soft launch in 2026. And so I would just say, before I get into the specifics of our PBL03 and PBL04, the stewardship that the speakers prior to me spoke of, I think agronomically we're at a point with our varieties where we can take a more serious look at introducing the Provisia technology especially in fields where the Clearfield system still works decently. This is a great time to switch to a new technology and begin working on those hard to control weedy rice, grasses, because the varieties just simply perform at a much higher level than those previous or early launches of the system. So PVL04 did extremely well in the upper Delta throughout the state of Arkansas into the Boot Hill of Missouri in 2024, and we certainly have high expectations for its performance in 2025. Next slide. So let's first talk about PVL03. PVL03 is a variety that LSU developed, and it does perform, I would say, the best down in the coastal region of South Louisiana and Texas. It's actually been the most widely planted variety of any technology, whether it's, Clearfield, conventional, hybrid, regardless, it has been the most popular variety grown in 23 as well as in 2024. When we look at that specific variety and how it performs in the upper Delta, we're probably in the range of 10 to 12% of our best Clearfield varieties. However, down in the coastal area, it's really, within 5 to 7% of our best varieties. So it is a situation, or it is a variety that has been put into a situation in South Louisiana, especially where we were really, really dire to clean up a lot of problems that was inhibiting economical rice production in that particular area. Just a few specifics about the variety. It has excellent standability. I would dare say most all, not necessarily all, but most all of our Provisia varieties going forward will have the PITA blast resistant gene. Seeding rate based on the seed size, we can typically plant 55 to no more than 65 pounds of treated seed per acre and have a adequate, economical stand. Fertilizer, again, these are pretty broad brush, each field's a little bit different, but for the most part, we can fertilize it at 120 to 160 pounds of nitrogen per acre. One disease that I do want to, caution listeners, if you're new to the technology, if you're new to the varieties, we want to plant these varieties early in the planting window. And the main reason is because it seems that both of these varieties have some susceptibility to Cercospora. And I'm not talking about narrow brown leaf spot. They're actually resistant to narrow brown leaf spot, but Cercospora on the stems and on the panicles can be very much like neck blast in terms of the yield potential, the loss of yield potential that you see. And our fungicides simply are not very good anymore. Just about all the diseases that we try to control in rice, we try to control it with azoxy, or I'll just say the strobularian family, as well as the propiconazoles, the triazole families. And these are old fungicides. We've certainly developed resistance over the years. So our best management tool for this stem Cercospora that does have a pretty substantial yield loss, is to plant early in the window for both PVL03 and the PVL04. We will plant PVL03 in the upper Delta this year, largely due to the seed shortage that we're seeing in our industry. The PVL04 is my pick for the upper Delta, but I just don't think that we would have enough seed to meet the demand that's there. And again, a lot of that demand was unforeseen demand due to some challenges in seed production from one of our competitors. So, if you've got PVL04, you know, we certainly saw extremely good performance on it last year in the Upper Delta. PBL03 can perform well. We saw good yields in the Upper Delta, but again, I would really push that variety to the very front of the planting window to maximize its yield performance. Next slide. So very similar, the PBL03 and PBL04, they're very, very similar in growth habits. Maturity, the PBL04 is going to be a few days later than PBL03, but in terms of the agronomic management of the varieties, their tolerance to the herbicides, they're very, very similar. The PBL04 was developed at the University of Arkansas, so a lot of the selection pressure was put on it in the Upper Delta. But we're excited about the performance of this variety. It actually led a lot of our seed production fields, even compared to some of our really top performing Clearfield varieties like CLL 16 and 18 and 19. PBL04 did very, very well. So we are excited about having more PBL04 out there across the landscape in the Upper Delta in 2025. And again, hopefully we as an industry will begin rotating these technologies where we can and maximize the benefit of both technologies to the best of our ability. Next slide. And I would just say, if you can see it on the screen, you can scan that barcode and it will take you to our app, our Horizon Ag app, that gives you all sorts of production information on these varieties, from seeding rate, calibrations to nitrogen recommendations and all of that. If you're not able to get that, I would just encourage you to go to www.horizonseed.com, and we have all of our variety information there on the website. We greatly appreciate your support of our brand. We greatly appreciate the trust that we have hopefully earned through the years with BASF to steward both the Clearfield and Provisia technologies. And we understand the economic situation that all of our farmers are being faced with this year, and certainly wish the best for a high performing crop, and hopefully prices will rebound a little bit and we'll be able to go again. So best of luck to all out there earning their livelihoods in rice. I'm right there with you. And we appreciate all that you do to support our brand. So with that, thank you so much, and I'll turn it back over to Keith.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate everybody on the call today. And if for some reason you didn't get a chance to get the QR code that Tim mentioned, we'll get that to you. I want to take just a minute for everybody who was looking for the CCA credits. Here's a screen. Please take a shot. Hopefully you can get in. If for some reason you can't get access or you can't get in to get your CCA credits for whatever reason, there will be a follow-up email that will have the ability to put in, as you see some of the information down at the bottom. So we'll leave this up here while we see if there's any questions and answers. But please get your CCA credits. But please, thanks everybody for today's talk. I want to thank everybody, Bob, Andrea, Tim, and everybody, this collaborative effort. I hope everybody got some great information out of it. And we are here to help you. So please reach out to any of us if we can help answer any questions you have. So let's see if we have any questions. Heather, do we happen to have any questions? If not, we can.
I don't see any, Keith.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we can leave this up here for a couple, maybe for another minute or so. But I appreciate everybody signing on today. And if anybody has any questions, please reach out to any of us that were on the call today. Thanks, everybody.